Welcome to the BTM Club in Conversation series. And as usual, I'm always bringing you the best of what's going on around. And I've been trying to chase this guy down for about 18 months now. And I've finally nailed him because he's not only a social butterfly, he's a global butterfly. He's never in one place too long. So it's quite difficult to pin him down. Welcome, Mr. David Oxley, or should I say Dr. David Oxley, to the show. Thank you very much for joining us.
Great to be here, Barry, and I'm sorry that I've been so elusive, but what do they say about good things to those who wait?
Indeed, and I'm a very patient man. I've been told that twice this week, so there must be some truth in it. Well, I mean, this guy is here today because he's written, is it 3 books in 18 months?
Well, I mean, there's these two,
Right? The
and
first
there's a
one
third one
is
coming in November.
A Career Carol. Okay,
Yes.
that's the first one.
Yeah.
The second one is A Groundhog Career,
Yeah.
which we went to the book launch for the other night.
Yes.
Tuesday night it was. And the third one, you haven't got that yet, I'm sure. And what's the title of that?
Third one is Artificial Death of a Career.
Artificial Death of a Career. Okay, so let's get a bit of background about this guy. He's a local boy. I still call him a boy because look at his boyish good looks. Very young looking, isn't he? But I call him a local boy. And went to Ennisdale School. Now, local is if you're from the Southeast area, which I am, and he is too. Went to Ennisdale, went to Catford Boys, and I really have to say, you are a success story. You are an absolute success story. Don't be
Even
modest.
though I didn't go to Riverston, correct?
Why did we have to bring up Riverston? We didn't have to bring up Riverston. This is about you, not me. But yes, you're an absolute success story. And I want to know how it all began for you. Because going from that beginning to now the global sensation that you are living in Mumbai, living in Abu Dhabi, the US, to becoming an author, where did it all start for you? Where did the journey start?
Well, the journey started in Lewisham, as you quite rightly just pointed out. So I grew up in Hither Green. Um, I think your life in my case evolved. There's no one thing that I think is easy to say as an answer to the question of
Yeah.
how did I get from there to here. But we started. Sue, I met Sue, who went to the same school as you, and she and I were childhood sweethearts. And from there, we went on a grand adventure. And that grand adventure took us from, in her case, Goldman Sachs, in my case, Ernst and Young, as an initial career. And that was a great springboard for me because it was a consulting world where I was involved in working with lots of different clients around the world. And it opened up this to a boy who grew up in Southeast London. It opened up this sort of oyster of, oh, the world is actually much bigger than I ever imagined it was when I was a kid. And it was, well, I need to go and explore this. How much of this can I get to see and play with? So in a way, I think it's that naive enthusiasm and that sense of, gosh, there are all these things that I could do. Let's see if I can.
But it's not necessarily naive. I think it's adventurous
Yes.
and almost fearless, because you're not aware of the challenges that are really involved in what you see is possible.
Yeah.
Because you think, yes, I can do this, that's possible, but you're not really realizing, you know, what it entails to get there. But there's a lot of bravery there and adventure in knowing
Yes.
that there's a lot more to the world than just my little space. Now you
Yes.
mentioned my dear friend Sue Oxley, and they were indeed childhood sweethearts. I think he had his eye on her from they were 11 years old, something like that.
Yes.
And being the true gallant prince that he is, he fulfilled the story to being here now at the age that we are in our 60s. I didn't say that out loud. In our 40s. And, Yes, fulfilling the story. So you started in banking. Is that what the story is?
In management consulting, Sue was in banking. She was with Goldman Sachs, and I was with Ernst and Young, which is a management consulting firm. And now most of my clients were banking clients. So
Right.
I worked with a lot of the large American banks. And that was sort of the springboard. And I agree with the way that you characterized it. Perhaps it wasn't naive, but there was this wanderlust. There was this sense of there are so many things to explore, both geographically, but also in terms of work challenges. And then trying to stretch yourself every time. I think we came from a school of thought in part. I think having that partnership, Sue and I, both with a similar outlook, I think that sort of helped because every time an opportunity came, there is this sort of choice, isn't there, between, well, do I stay with what I'm familiar with? Do I continue to live in the same place, do the same job, have the same commute to work, do the familiar, or do I take on this perhaps risky, but if your point of view is it's an adventure, it's something new, it's undiscovered, well, I wonder where it will lead. And we'd always, I think, been wired in that latter sense of, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Let's have a go. We might be good at it. We might fail, but we're not too worried about that. We'll always pick ourselves up and find something else. So that's really the springboard, Barry, that sent us off. I think at the age of 20 or 25, I never would have imagined that it would have taken us to the United States, to India, to the Middle East, to other parts of Europe, and even sort of as far afield as China and Japan. So there are lots of aspects of that that would have been beyond my wildest imagination, but they end up just being natural next steps. It's quite strange that they don't
Yes,
seem
and things
terribly.
do tend to take, you realize that once you are courageous enough to take the plunge, things tend to evolve themselves.
Hmm.
The
Yeah,
next opportunity comes from being in that environment and you do the next thing once you're brave enough to take on the next thing. But I mean, I'm
okay.
jumping the gun a bit because really and truly, going back to what you said earlier, do we stay in the familiar and remain doing something that's the familiar, which a lot of people do. And you realize even though it's familiar and secure and safe, they're not necessarily happy doing that. And
Which is a lovely springboard into the latest book that we've just written, The Groundhog Career. I mean, one of the things that inspired us to write that book, and I'm sure we'll bridge into how we got into writing books in a second, but I'm staggered even now to read these statistics about 60% of us are unhappy in our work, 20% of us feel it's an absolute source of misery. I mean, it's extraordinary that we have this epidemic, perhaps not pandemic, but epidemic of dissatisfaction with our work. I mean, it fascinates me, perhaps because of what we've been talking about, that I've always been wired to go for the adventure, to go to stretch and do something that I consider to be interesting. And then perhaps I've done that for 2 or 3 years and then moved on, always constantly trying to not consciously reinvent myself, but always stretching for the next adventure. And then when we sat to write these books that we've been writing about career advice for young professionals, the second installment is very much about, well, why is it that so many of us seem to be unhappy at work? Isn't there an alternative? Can't we frame it differently? So in a way, what you just said about the familiar versus stretching is part of the answer. It's part of getting stuck in this sort of relentless, repetitive, the tyranny of the everyday administrative hassle of a job.
yes, I think when you said the epidemic of, job misery, shall we call it? But I
Yeah,
think it's more of an addiction to security that
yeah,
keeps people there. Not
yeah,
so much that they, really love this job, but it's the addiction to security. And they'll sell their souls for this security to know that they'll get that paycheck every time, but more and more of them is dying every day that they're going to this institution that they hate, which is basically it. And now you're thinking, well, of course you're miserable because dedicating so many hours of your day every week to going to a place that you don't really want to be, but you're going for the security, the holiday pay, the sick pay, the salary
But
you
it,
get.
but isn't that whole thing, Barry, fascinating? It fascinates me because I think human beings are very clever. We have, this incredible brain, and we're able to think and imagine all sorts of things. People who are, and the way we characterize it in a groundhog career is that people who get trapped in this existence, the idea of the familiar. But in a way, it's how our brains work. We are conditioned by our parents and by society to get a good job that pays a good wage, to go and be financially independent, and to do many things that then trap us. The very things that we're encouraged to do in our teenage and early 20s are the things that end up in our 30s and 40s being sort of almost like a prison cell. And so it's interesting to go through that, because I think it is certainly true to say that there are people who prefer the familiar and the reliable and a routine, but there's also a sense of how that traps you. And when we try to unpick that, I think it's important to try and help people understand the consequences of those choices, because as you just beautifully said, a decision today to take the job that pays the most money then presents choices that have you sort of spend to the level of that new salary, and then you end up being in this sort of strange existence where it's difficult to escape it. It becomes difficult to escape this circular, I make this money, I spend this money, I live in this house, and I have these things, but I'm not happy. And so how do you escape from that? Once you recognize it's a trap for some people, how do you escape from it? And I think that's a very timely question for people as we emerge from COVID, as we think about what's really important in life, and particularly when Gen Z now, who are coming into the workplace, who have very different aspirations about what work should mean.
Yeah. I mean, as you said about you know, it's not a miserable choice for some people, because there are some people who are quite satisfied to be in this secure space. They don't necessarily want anything more. But I don't
Mhm.
think you're really talking about those people, and that's not what the books are aimed at, really. It's aimed at the people who are finding that they are kind of in a rut, for want of a better word. But yes, I'm in a secure space. But you, as I keep saying, had the courage to go and seek the adventure. And to some degree, I am like that with things. I just plunge in and then think after, oh, hell, I need this to do that, and I need this to do that. But it is having the curiosity and the courage. And I always say to people, be assured that the first of anything you do is going to be the worst. So don't worry about that. Don't worry about it. And as you said, if it goes wrong, we'll pick ourselves up. But rest assured, the first of anything you do is always going to be the worst. And as you continue doing, that's the practice that gets you better at it. But
Yeah.
you have to get past the ego of, oh, I don't want to look an idiot doing this. I don't want to make a mistake and be seen to make a mistake. I need one of those mugs, by the way. Yes,
product
one.
product placement.
Indeed, I
Yeah,
need one of those mugs. So,
yeah. I think bridging to the books, and why we're talking about these things. When we came through our adventures, Sue and I, along the way, we picked up a few educational qualifications. One of which, in my case, was a doctorate in social sciences, talking about irrational behavior, and how very often human beings faced with what seems like the rational decision and a somewhat irrational decision, why many of us choose the irrational. And it's fascinating. You see this dysfunctionality in some organizations, but you see it at a very individual level. And I always had this aspiration to say, when my corporate life allows me the time, it would be interesting to write on that subject, but to do so in a way that could help an underserved population, to do something that might help people that aren't well served by the existing business literature. And I found constantly I was asked by people to provide some career advice. And I'd say, well, why don't you read this book or read this other book? And they'd say, oh gosh, no, they're horrible. They're terribly difficult to read. It's almost like a visit to the dentist. In fact, one person actually said it's like a colonoscopy. And that stuck in my head. I thought, well, how do I write a book that isn't like
like a colonoscopy?
So that's what brought us to where we are. Once we left India, COVID shut down the borders, and Sue and I had to leave the assignment we had in India a little prematurely, and we were left with a bit of time on our hands, and so that's what launched us into the first book, A Career Carol.
And I also think that time being stolen,
yeah,
you come out of it with a different perspective, because you realize in an instant how quickly things can change, your life can change, and it's slipping through your fingers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's right. I think we're talking very much about how your perspective gets reframed by either events, and the pandemic certainly was one of those events that really sort of helped you or forced you to reframe some of the things you were doing and ask yourself some questions. And I suppose my aha coming out of that is that often we're not very good at asking ourselves the difficult questions. It's much easier to continue the routine, to continue doing what we're doing, rather than sort of take that really sort of close look in the mirror at, well, what are we doing and why are we doing it? Because, it's much easier in a way just to go through the next day the same way as we did today. I mean, it's sort of an easy thing to do.
It's easy
and the pandemic jogged us out of that, didn't it, really? I think in many different ways, a lot of us
exactly
were faced with different choices.
And I mean, it really did show that all boundaries had changed completely,
Yeah.
And it's the difference between those who fell by the wayside and those who were able to claw through it because of their perspective. And
Yeah.
I do keep saying bravery, because it does take bravery to keep going. And as I say, bravery isn't not being scared. Bravery is being scared, but doing it anyway.
Yes.
Yeah,
I think that's right. I think there's something that drives most of us. Most of us want to go forward. I think some of us have difficulty imagining some of the discussions we've had around careers and why people struggle. The story of I don't like my job. I don't like I don't like my boss. I don't like my company. I don't like some other aspect. And so the question naturally is, well, why don't you do something about it? What's the alternative? Well, I don't know what I'd do if I didn't do the current job. And that seems to be so. I suppose trying to be as charitable as possible and to be as generous as possible. And I think that's the right thing. You want to be constructive. You don't want to be judgmental about these things. You say, okay, if you're in a job that you don't enjoy, but you're struggling to understand what your alternatives are, let's work through that. Let's understand why you've got some challenges there, because I can guarantee anyone listening to this podcast, anyone that we can talk to randomly, there are alternatives. They may not be alternatives that you particularly care for. That's a different question. But the suggestion that you don't necessarily have an alternative is probably false.
And alternatives that you're not even aware are available. Some people are not even aware of their own potential and the fact that, well, I've done this and got experience in this. I don't necessarily like this area, but the experience I've gained in this area could actually springboard me to do something else.
Yes. Yes, I mean, one of the things that I'm inspired by is when I see people who have gone through a challenge. They've been unfortunately part of a corporate downsizing, they've been made redundant, or they've lost a job, or and they feel very down, and then they pick themselves up. And sometimes it takes 6 months or a year, but they pick themselves up and then they do something else. And in the process, they look back and say, I never could have imagined. I mean, any conversation I have that starts with, I never could have imagined I would be here now. Yeah. And I wouldn't have been here now had that terrible event not happened. And so
Right.
when you start to unpick that, you say it's interesting because you didn't choose to do it, you were somewhat forced into it.
Yeah.
But then you discovered something about yourself that you otherwise wouldn't have done. And that I find that it's actually quite uplifting to think that people can be so resilient, but we're often scared of taking that first step.
Yeah. It's the scariness of what can be the unknown. Oh God, what's going to happen if I step through that door? Well, you won't know unless you try. you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So, what brought you and Mr. Helmut Schultz together? How did you two come together?
He tells the story somewhat differently to the way I'm going to tell it to you. Now, if you ask him, and you know him clearly, Barry, so you may now get a different story if you check. But he and I started to work together in 2004. He was a senior executive at BP, the British Petroleum,
Mhm.
and he was looking to hire someone to fix some problems he had in the American part of the company. And so he says he was exhausted. He'd interviewed 8 or 9 people, and then I came along. Um, and he said that I was trying to think modestly. I would say that I was at least a passable candidate. We hit it off. And there's something about, I think perhaps we all have people like this in our lives where it's just a very natural partnership. There was something about the interview I had with him was like no other interview I'd had. It wasn't like I was being judged or tested, or there was someone was trying to uh, trick me or something with,
Yeah, trick you up in the
strange
interview
interview
too. Yeah.
questions. We just had this great conversation, and I started we I think halfway through, I started to finish his sentences and he started to finish mine. And there was a component in that you went, I think we'd work really well together. And that's not often the case with interviews, because you have this sort of us and them type thing going on where, the candidate comes in all very anxious and nervous about trying to pass the test of the interview, and the,
And to
the
impress.
interviewers are trying to, yeah, to prove that they're being tough and that they're not letting any riffraff into the company. So you get that dynamic makes it hard.
Yeah.
But he and I hit it off. Now, and he says we worked closely from 2004. This is where I have a slight difference. Every time there was a problem, he'd send me somewhere. And so that's where I ended up getting sent to India and sent to Abu Dhabi and sent to the Middle East and sent to other parts of the world. So in my view was he kept trying to send me away, and I just like the proverbial bad penny kept coming back. Um, we had a great working relationship, and we had said, you know what, we saw so many things good. What was it? I was about to say good and bad. I was trying to be a bit more polite than that. But we saw some extraordinary things during the course of our career working together for over 20 years. And we said, you know what? We need to write a book about how behaviors can be so strange. Not to shame any one individual, but just to try and unpick why things go wrong. And very often it's about behaviors that have sort of individual glorification or individual ambition fulfillment over what really makes sense for the business or what really makes sense for the customer. And so,
Now, sorry to interrupt you. Can you reiterate that perfect line that you just spoke? Can you? The
which
one
which
about
one of the
people, that line that
perfect
you
lines, Barry? There
just
were so many.
uttered, talking about people with the inflated importance, making things more difficult than it need be, really
The
serve,
root,
I'm paraphrasing,
yes,
basically serving their ego and their position rather than
the
doing
root
what's good for the project.
the root cause of almost every crisis, every corporate crisis, every business that goes bankrupt, every business that hits the skids is is almost always individual avarice. Is this fulfillment of individual ego
Yeah.
over purpose of serving the customer or producing a good product. And there are notable exceptions to this that we often hold up as examples where, you know, the Steve Jobs of this world may not have been particularly nice people, but they very much focused on the customer and the product. But there are other examples. Sam Bankman-Fried recently with his crypto stuff and the Theranos debacle. All of these businesses that have seen themselves been lifted up as somehow wonderful and then revealed to be something less than that. It's typically individual ego fulfillment that ends up overtaking the business purpose.
So the first book came literally as a hand guide to circumnavigating problems and making the journey easier.
Our first book was a proof of concept. It was intended to be a fun story. So we focused very much, Barry, on trying to make it the antidote to the colonoscopy story that I provided, where it was, how do we write something that would be fun? You know, how do I give a book to someone who's, I don't know, pick an age, 18, 25, and say, this is actually going to be fun. It's not going to be painful. And in the process of reading it, there are some significant issues that it discusses, but it discusses it in a fun way. It doesn't hit you over the head with a plank of wood and say, here are the things that you really need to be aware of, and here's 50 pages of deep analysis. And so it was very much
a language that no one understands.
Right. So we told the story of Shey Sinope, a character that we invented, about to graduate from school and visited by 4 ghosts. You'll be somewhat familiar with this format, and telling him what was in store for him and trying to forewarn him that there are certain things that he's going to face that he should be prepared for. So we did it in a humorous way. We were very happy with how well the book did. It surprised us and a few other people as well, and that led to the second book.
And the third, which is on its way.
And the third, the second and the third book, yes, they will come along together. Don't want to spoil the surprise of the third book.
Oh, okay.
Focus on the second. You're trying.
I have to edit that bit out. Okay, guys.
We will get, when we get to October and November, we'll do another one of these, and we can talk about the third book.
Now, you really are futurists. Is that the correct word for you?
Career futurists.
Career futurists. That's right. Because it really is investing in the next generation, because you're giving them your wealth of experience.
Yes. I mean, I think it's about, so one of the challenges that we recognize was that, we're both now in our 60s, and we've had our 40-year careers. We still think we're relevant, and we still think that the experience we had is valuable. But I think we recognize that the way jobs at a transactional level are now unfolding, how you acquire them, is a bit different to how it was when we first started our careers in the early 80s. So there is a distinction in, the books we're writing and the subject matters that we're talking about are not intended to be the transactional things. How do you get a job via LinkedIn, or how do you get a job using how do you navigate artificial intelligence in the interviewing process, which is now very complex. Because those things aren't, we're aware of them and we've studied them, and to some extent we've been the arbiters of installing them in companies. So I'm sorry about that, but we were to some extent trying to play with that and see if it would work. We're more talking about the more eternal questions. One of the things that I think people forget is that, for 1,000 years, human beings, longer than that, I don't know, 5,000 years, we've been struggling with these life phases. We go from children, adolescence, we seek independence from our parents, we go out into the big bad world and we try and make our mark. After about 10 or 15 years, we typically then take another phase, another step in our careers. And then we have these moral hazards that will trap us sometimes. And then we have to face reinvention, what happens in our 40s and 50s when we have to look at ourselves and think of ourselves differently. We're no longer kids. We have to think about ourselves in a different frame. And we're interested in those because they're more eternal. They're things that I think break through these barriers of the digital age versus the analog age. They are things that are, if we fast forward 5,000, well, I don't know about 5,000 years, but it's certainly because people might be living for hundreds of years at that stage. So, but if we fast forward another 50 years, these themes that we're trying to talk about are still going to be relevant.
Still going to be there. Yeah.
So we focus in on those, and the experience that we have combined with the academic research that we've done into this space, I think makes it very relevant. But the key thing, and I come back to this, because what we say is our one promise is we're going to entertain. It's not going to be a colonoscopy. It's not going to be a visit to the dentist. So let's entertain. And in the process, let's see if we can inspire some introspection, some thinking. So we say we promise to try and entertain everyone, and we hope at least one person will navigate their careers more effectively as a consequence. And we hope that person is you.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, I've been to both of the book launches now, and I saw a very different presentation for the second book. Oh, that was so clean and slick, that second
Yeah.
presentation. The first one was fine. It was much freer and
Yeah.
organic.
Mhm.
But the second one, very slick, and you had some great speakers, and I can't remember their names, but two in particular just, bowled me over, I would say. The guy to the far left, that was
Daniel Obst, who
right.
is the chairman of AFS, which is a youth organization based in New York.
Yeah, that's right. And the Scottish lady in red,
Alison Edgar.
phenomenal. I just thought
Alison
she was
Edgar,
a real powerhouse.
godmother to the entrepreneurs. She's
Yeah, that's her title. But that talk left you thinking, wow, you really inspire people to reinvent, do it as many times as you want to, however you want to. You don't have to follow a template. It's about the individuality and being yourself and not necessarily running companies to a template. Looking at the people that you've got there and working with them, their strengths, their individuality, and allowing them a space to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's beautifully said, Barry, because it's really about individuals. Too many books, I think, in a way, are written about, let me tell you my story, let me tell you my template, let me tell you how I did it, right? With a view to saying, well, then you can copy that. And we don't look at it that way. The way we look at it is, Barry, your story is your story, your
Yeah,
journey is your journey. Let's see if we can help contribute to giving you some things to think about. And this is where I think a story, paints 1,000 pictures, where you are able to tell a story and then allow an individual to take the pieces from that story that might be meaningful for them without wishing to prejudge that. We are 100% in agreement with you that there is no one answer to the question, what should you aspire to be? The story I often tell is that we get asked in these interviews that we do, well, what did you want to do when you were 18 or 19? And Helmut has this lovely story about he was going to be an Olympic swimmer. He was on the Austrian national team. He went to America to fulfill this dream. And then they turned to me and say, well, what did you want to do? And I said, I just wanted to, get a job. I just wanted to get a job, and I wanted to get married. And, I had what I consider to be very modest, but realistic aims for where I was.
aspirations. Yeah.
And so, careers unfold is my point in very different ways. If you were to ask, interestingly, if you would ask Steve Jobs when he was 18 what he wanted to do, he had no clue. You
Yeah.
read that biography of his, which is very powerful, and he goes off to college, and all he was interested in was the lessons about calligraphy and fonts. That was the thing that inspired him when he was at school. How that then translated to Apple Computer is a story that evolved for him over many, many years. And so I think it's okay. I think the desire should be for us, or we should be very careful not to superimpose judgment on people. I think when families say to kids, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? Who do you want to
Yeah.
be? it's a lot of pressure, and I don't know that it necessarily helps because it's not very
It's
practical.
actually quite destructive
Yeah,
because, it's crushing so many things just in that one line.
yeah,
Putting, as you say, pressure on to think, well, I need to decide what I need to do at 18. No, you
yes,
don't.
yes,
Because as life is coming, different opportunities are presenting themselves.
yeah.
And,
I
you
agree.
know,
What were
so
you going to do when you were 18, Barry?
I had no idea. I had no idea. I had a great time at school, loved school, as your wife will tell you.
Yeah,
We had a great time at school. We then went to college, and I just went from doing things that I enjoyed. That's
right.
what I'll say. I never pursued a career as such, thinking, well, I've got to do this. I always thought, oh, that looks quite interesting. Let me try that. And I'd be involved in that for 4 or 5 years. And then something else, I think, oh, I've had enough of that now. Let's try something else. And that's really how I've gone through life.
Yeah. And it's a great, I mean, it's not a bad, I mean, if you want a template, it's not a bad template because it doesn't presuppose the answer to the question, what that is.
Mm.
The answer to the question, things that are interesting, things that you would like to explore, can be very different for every individual. And I acknowledge, and it's important, I think, to reinforce that there are realities in life. There are certain things that you would want to aspire to do as well. So there are compromises
Yeah.
between what you would ideally like to do and what ultimately might provide you with some level of income to, have a roof over your head and, have food on your table. So there are compromises along the way. One of the things that we talk about in the book is about purpose, and purpose is a bit overused. A lot of people talking about purpose-driven careers, and so we've tried to stay clear of delving or repeating what are now increasingly cliches. But there is this sense of when you get trapped in your career, you end up thinking about things in sort of 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, sometimes 6 month type timeframes. And so you get trapped into these short timeframes, and that's part of the problem of getting trapped. The good thing about a purpose, a driving cause, something, a conviction that you have about what you're trying to achieve, is that they tend to be longer timeframes. They tend to be, 5 years, 10 years. And we try and encourage people to say, convictions don't need to be changing the world, although that could be the case. But
Mm.
it could be providing for a family, or it could be for love. I'm providing for my elderly parents, or I'm doing something in order to make life better for them. So, or it could be duty. I'm going to go out and provide something that other people need. Or it could be a solution to a problem in my community. But all of these things are difficult to quantify with a number, and this is where it gets into the qualitative and quantitative. So many people get trapped into the quantitative aspects of their career. How much salary do they make?
Yes.
What their bonus is, and as opposed to the qualitative aspects, what does it enable? What is it in your life or the people around you that you love? What does it enable in their lives? And the irony, and I'll leave this perhaps as the mic drop a little bit, but the irony here is that if you focus too much on the quantitative, you actually destroy the love and affection and the aspect of the family because you don't see people. You typically don't invest in them. Whereas if you focus on the qualitative, you enhance all of those relationships and you focus in on what makes those things better. And some financial security is part of that, but it's not all of it.
Well, no, absolutely not. But what I love with how you guys have structured the book and what you're trying to do and the message you're putting out there, you are creating a space that accommodates people's and individuals' nuances. So you're saying that it is, this is possible, but of course that might change because you are you and only you are you and will do it the way you do it. But
Yeah.
it makes a space to accommodate people's individuality and say that with all of that you can still create a life that is fulfilling and you're happy with.
Yeah.
You don't have to follow the template that's making you miserable.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So it's a great job that you're doing. It's very interesting. And I love that you're making it funny and entertaining. And you guys as a team are quite funny and entertaining, especially
Well,
Mr. Man, Helmet.
I I think we are. Um, yeah, I think joy, fun. It is one of those things that we talk about the Mary Poppins component to it, a spoonful of sugar. It's not a bad way to live life. Even the most mundane tasks sometimes that we have to do can be joyful. We were writing something because it's International Happiness Day today,
Absolutely. And who
March,
better to talk to? The most
and Barry Thomas. Barry Thomas on March the
I
20th
actually
Happiness Day.
meant you, but hey.
No, it's mutual. But we were talking about well, how you frame your daily activities. So we said, but it's an interesting question. How did you get to work today? And I had this sort of random conversation where it said, oh, I had terrible difficulty getting work today. The trains were cancelled, so I had to get one of these electric bikes somewhere, and then I had to get a river taxi, and then I had to do something else, and then I got to work, and then they said, and was it appreciated? Was the effort appreciated? And I said to them, and I had this sort of moment where I thought, well, let's turn this around. So you're saying that it has to be appreciated, but let's just play back. What an adventure you had today. You did something completely different. You cycled, you got some exercise, you went on a river cruise, you got to see places that you hadn't seen before, you got to the office on time, you still did your work. How we choose to frame that story in our own minds is fascinating, because I could tell that story that evening. Barry, if you and I were meeting at the book launch, I could choose to come to it and go, gosh, I've had a bad day, or I could come to that meeting and go, what an adventure I had
You
today.
never
I got to do
believe
all
what
these different
happened.
things.
It's all about perspective, isn't it? An outlook.
Right. So
Yeah.
on International Happiness Day, it seems like we should we not focus on that? And it's not necessarily cup half full or half empty. I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with it that way. It's how we relate to the opportunity. Sue and I have this occasionally if we're trying to travel somewhere and the flight is cancelled and we have to we get a stopover somewhere. Now, we can either look at that as a negative, or we can say, gosh, we now get to see a new city, or we get to see something else. And so we choose
To
most of the
take the
time.
positive
We're
out
not
of
we're not
something.
saints, but we choose most of the time to go, hey, opportunity to do something we haven't done before.
But it's not even about being a saint or it really is just about looking at it rationally
Yeah,
and saying, well, what do I get out of looking at things negatively? How does it enhance my life or the
yeah,
people around me if I look at every situation negatively? So
yeah,
to me, then the obvious solution is to say, well, you know what? Okay, it wasn't ideal, it wasn't what I planned, but at the end of the day, I'm here.
yeah,
I made it.
yeah.
So
I think that. So I think lifting, trying to there's this mindfulness is another thing that you hear a lot of over the space of the last 3 or 4 years, or being conscious about how we're relating to it. There is a Britishness about being cynical. There is a Britishness about, um, well, that would happen, wouldn't it? You hear these phrases, of course
yeah,
that would happen to me, or would you believe it? And of course, so I find those phrases and statements interesting, particularly when you have spent time living in other places in the world, and you start to see it as a sort of almost unique British identity. Now, some of that's great. Some of that is the sort of Dunkirk spirit. Some of that is dealing with adversity in a positive way, or not taking it as an absolute defeat. But the key question is what follows the first statement. So the first statement is, well, this would happen, wouldn't it? And then I how did I then go from that? Did I allow it to get on my back? Did I allow it to stop me from doing what I really want to do? Did I see it? Did I take it as an obstacle, or do I just shake it off? Or do I even more positively, do I use it as some sort of positive to then launch me into the next step? And careers are very much like that. No one goes through a career without suffering some sort of adversity, some sort of knockback, some sort of disappointment. You said it again at the outset, where the first time you do something is almost always the worst. And then you get better. So the idea of being able to train yourself to have these conversations with yourself and then surround yourself with some people that are going to give you the positive spin or the ability to sympathize, empathize, but then try and push you forward, I think is part of the trick of living a
Oh,
fulfilling
it's
and a happy life.
beyond a little part. It's an integral part of moving forward. Who you surround yourself with. Because if you surround yourself with positive people who are encouraging, inspirational, empathic, you have a very different kind of life
Yes.
from the opposites. And that's one thing that I would actually say to people is that the sooner you learn to surround yourself with positivity in your life, empathic people, inspirational people, the sooner your life becomes, a bloom of flowers.
Yes. I I think that's right. All of the social research on this does reinforce that. There's the context of a network. There are different phrases to or labels to put on it. We call it a cabal of somewhere between 9 and 15 people. If you haven't got 9 or 15 people in your life that you feel comfortable being you, no face, no mask, you can be you. You don't have to see them every day. You don't necessarily have to see them every week, but you need to be comfortable being you. Now, the trick isn't just simply having 9 or 15 that you say, yes, I can be me with these 9 or 15, but you also have to be honest with them about what you're feeling and about your insecurities and about, whether or not you're struggling with something. Because we sometimes, struggle to have more than, say, 1 or 2 people in our lives. So having a little more diversity, a little wider network of people that we can be comfortable with. And then even more difficult, being honest with them about whether we're struggling and whether or not we've got a problem. Because again, it's partially Britishness, but the idea of stiff upper lip and, suck it up and get on with it, I think is kind of counterproductive in the long run. And you don't need to be having conversations every day necessarily about, oh, I'm feeling a bit down, because that would probably not be effective for you or your network. But there are occasions where struggling with work issues or, get particularly moral problems, when you got into a situation at work where work is, that there are things going on at work, that there are behaviors that are not the way they should be, and people are being treated the wrong way, or there are aspects of what's going on at work that you're struggling with. If you can't divulge that confidentially to someone in your network and get a neutral sounding board, an objective sounding board to say, oh no, something's crossed the line here. You need to either call it out or get out, right? You either
Yeah,
call it out and deal with it, or you get out of there and you go somewhere else. And if you don't have that, the danger is you just drift along with it.
yeah,
And then inevitably the circumstances end up blowing up in your face.
absolutely. Well, what a wonderful 45 minutes talking to Mr. David Oxley. I keep saying Mr. I have to say Dr. David
It's okay.
Oxley.
It's on the book. So
Dr.
when,
David
when people
Oxley.
buy the book, they can see the title. I'm very relaxed about it.
Now, where can we get the books?
Amazon is now the place that you can get all books, isn't it? So it's both of the books are on Amazon.co.uk. I'm delighted to say A Groundhog Career is the #1 release in the career category on Amazon as we speak. So it's done
Really? Well done.
remarkably well this week. It was the #1 book and #1 release this week. Um, quite proud of that. You can also get it via our website if you want to go to Doctors Schuster and Oxley, and AND rather than ampersand, and Oxley.com. They're the two main places.
Can you
We are
just say the
hoping
website again, please? Because it's better if you say it than I try to say it.
Doctors DRS, Doctors Schuster and Oxley.com.
Right. Okay.
It's a mouthful, but
It is.
if you Google Doctors Schuster and Oxley, you'll find our website. So we're also on LinkedIn. We do a fantastic monthly newsletter, which I promise you is the best newsletter that Doctors Schuster and Oxley are able to produce. And we're on Instagram. They're probably the main social sites that we currently frequent.
Right. Okay. Well, it's better that you gave the website and where we can get the book than me trying to say it and messing it up.
That's
So
it.
you got the information directly from Dr. Oxley. Got it right? Got it right. So a career carol is the first one, and the second one is a groundhog career. That poor man on a groundhog career looks stressed out to the max.
He does. The actor that we had play him on the book launch did a great job, didn't he? He was
He
very
did.
believable.
Very
Yeah.
good. Very, very good indeed. Well, thank you for your time. I know you're busy traveling all over the place. So where is your next travel to?
We're going to Dublin next week, which is only a short trip, and then we're back to Austin at the end of the month.
And Austin, Texas is home.
It is home, yes.
It is home. But knowing you guys, you won't be there for very long. You'll get itchy feet and be traveling off somewhere
We will.
else
We'll
very
be back
soon.
here in June, so we'll hopefully see you again then.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Oxley, one half of Dr. Oxley and Schuster. I got it right. I
You
got
did.
it
Well
right.
done. You'd be
All the
very
best with
proud.
the books, and we will speak very soon.
Okay.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Barry.
You're welcome. How was that?